I think one of the important things about teaching a course like this is to give the students some context about where your journey is or where your journey was as a photographer to get to the position you're at today. Over the course of the last 12 years working as a photographer, I've kind of made a number of transitions during that period, and I think it's important to make those transitions obvious to the students so they can see the kind of progression of the way that I'm thinking about photography, the way that I'm executing it, and the way that everything that kind of goes on behind the scenes, if you like, in terms of actually creating the end product. Because often what you get to see is the polished, finished product, whether it's the book or the exhibition or the magazines. And then after doing that, really trying to get the students thinking about what it is they're interested in talking about through their photography. From that point, you start looking at how you actually kind of create some visual dialogue, if you like, in terms of a consistency of style and approach. I don't necessarily want to have a style which goes through 30, 40 years of my work as a photographer. However, I think it is important that there are, particularly with each project, that there is a coherent authorship, author style in that body of work, and then each one progresses. I mean, I don't want to think that in 20 years' time I'm taking the same photographs I'm taking now, because it's just not, for me, it's just not interesting. One of the most important things is that when you're starting a project, even if you don't necessarily have an overarching theme for what the work is about, what you're not doing is just creating an eclectic mix of photographs. That really, when you come to the end to try and bring these things together, that they don't tell a narrative. Now, of course, that narrative can be one photograph, or it could be 100 photographs. But the point is that there is a kind of consistency in approach that means that there is a way that the narrative sits as a whole and is understood by the viewer. And so whenever I'm approaching a project, I will always think quite carefully about how what is my photographic stance, what is my what is the message I want to convey, and actually how am I going to do that in terms of the framing of my picture. For instance, with We English, I took a lot of time in terms of preparing the way that I was going to create this body of work in terms of the compositional makeup of each photograph. So, for instance, that every picture was going to be taken from an elevated position. So as a viewer, you were always overlooking the scene. The people were always going to be relatively small in the frame, at least a third of the frame or smaller. Every picture was going to be taken on a plate camera because I wanted to slow down the process of making each photograph. But also I wanted to create a performance in the way that I was using this camera. What you're doing is you're setting up an old camera on a tripod, and you're using a hood, so to put over your head like a cape. And so when I'm in the landscape taking this picture, I'm creating a drama for others to be part of. And so in some ways people become part of that, the experience of being photographed. Rather than me being a threatening figure on the landscape, I'm suddenly actually becoming more of an intrigue, and over time people just then let you kind of carry on with what you're doing. So thinking about why I'm doing each element of it and how that will end up in the final series of pictures. And of course with We English, I was treading in a very well-trodden path. So ever since the beginning of photography, there's been British photographers going out to look at the landscape. So I was putting myself in a very particular lineage of historic documentation of the landscape. And so it was important that I was thinking clearly about why I was doing it and why I was following in this tradition and how my photographs were going to be saying something new. So when you go through the book, there is a kind of clear position, and it does kind of feel like it holds together as a coherent series. In the We English project, I decided that I was only going to photograph leisure in the landscape, because leisure is the one thing that we all do very self-consciously. So most people don't work doing something that they enjoy. They work to spend, to earn money to spend it on their leisure time. So where people spend their leisure at the weekends says more about people's identity and their relationship to a place, because it's somewhere they're choosing to spend their time. If I look back over the last 7 years, I've actually only really produced 3 main bodies of work. And really, they are very kind of big productions. So both Motherland and We English was a year on the road, but prior to that it was up to a year's planning, and then post that it was up to a year kind of producing the book and the exhibitions. And so these are kind of very extensive projects, even in terms of the most recent project, the election that I did last year, which was a commission for the House of Commons. That was a month's commission, but I spent 3 months pre-planning it. Now I'm in a stage of life where I've got children, and of course things will change, and I won't be spending as much, you know, there won't be these kind of huge entities. However, I think it's important in terms of the way that these projects were produced, that there was a lot of time put into them.